Gavin Sterling slammed the divorce papers onto the marble table so hard the water glasses shook. He grabbed Audrey's wrist tight enough to leave marks and pulled her forward until she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Sign it," he said, "or I will make sure every door in this city closes in your face permanently." She looked down at his hand on her wrist. Then she looked up at him, and she signed. He released her, straightened his jacket, and laughed. Actually laughed, turning to his attorneys like she was already gone, like she was already nothing. She picked up her pen, her bag, and walked out. He had no idea what he had just started. If you've ever watched someone you love be destroyed in slow motion and couldn't do a thing about it, stay with me because this story is going to take you somewhere you did not see coming. Before we go further, please hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. And let's begin. The morning of the signing, Audrey Hale woke up at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before her alarm, and lay in the dark staring at the ceiling of what used to be her bedroom. Their bedroom. 12 years of a life assembled piece by piece in this house, the brushed nickel fixtures she'd picked out herself, the reading nook she'd built with her own hands during a long Seattle winter, the smell of cedar from the closet where Gavin's suits still hung in perfect military order. She didn't cry. She'd done all of that 6 weeks ago alone in the guest bathroom with the shower running so no one could hear her. She wasn't doing that anymore. She got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen island for the last time. Her attorney, Patricia Wells, had called her the night before with what she called a realistic assessment of the situation. "Audrey," Patricia had said, her voice careful the way doctors get careful before bad news. "Gavin's team has been thorough. Every asset, the house, the investment accounts, the business interests, everything is structured through holding entities that technically predate the marriage. The prenuptial agreement as written covers the rest. If we fight this, we are looking at 2 to 3 years of litigation, and his attorneys will outspend us into the ground. I have to be honest with you." "Then be honest," Audrey had said. "You walk away with the 2018 Honda and whatever is in your personal checking account. That's the realistic outcome if we settle." There was a silence on the line. "How much is in the personal checking account?" Patricia asked gently. $4,211. Another silence. "Audrey, schedule the signing for tomorrow morning," Audrey said. "I'll be there at 9. She hung up before Patricia could argue. Now she sat with her coffee cooling in her hands and thought about the version of herself that had walked into this marriage. 29 years old, a fixed-income analyst at Merrill Lynch, sharper than most of the men on her floor and fully aware of it. She had her own money, her own apartment, her own name on her own accounts. She had a mentor named Dean Ackworth, who used to joke that she read a balance sheet the way other people read novels for the plot. She had given all of that up piece by piece, year by year, because Gavin had a particular talent for making sacrifice feel like love. "Why are you still working so hard?" he'd said early in the marriage, with that gentle concern that she now understood was architecture. "We don't need the money. I need you here. We need you here." And she had stayed. She had stopped thinking of herself as an analyst and started thinking of herself as Gavin Sterling's wife. It happened slowly the way erosion happens. You don't notice until the ground is already gone. The morning of the signing, she finished her coffee, rinsed the mug, and set it on the drying rack. Then she picked up the single bag she had packed the night before, closed her laptop, a folder of documents she had quietly been assembling for the past 3 months, and her mother's pearl earrings, and she walked out the front door without looking back. She did not look back. That was important. She had decided somewhere in the long, dark hours before dawn that looking back was the luxury of people who still lived there. She did not live there anymore. Tick. The conference room at Harwick and Pierce occupied the 41st floor of a downtown Seattle tower, and it had the kind of view that was designed to make people feel small. Gavin understood this. He had chosen this firm, this room, this elevation deliberately. Everything Gavin did was deliberate. He was already seated when Audrey arrived, flanked by 2 attorneys whose combined hourly rate probably exceeded what most people earned in a month. He was wearing a charcoal suit, his intimidation suit she'd always privately called it, and he had the relaxed posture of a man who had already won, which by every visible metric he had. Audrey set her bag down, sat across from him, and placed her hands flat on the table. Gavin looked at her the way you look at something that used to matter. "You look tired," he said. "I'm fine, Gavin." "I want you to know," he said, and his voice had that practiced warmth that she had once mistaken for sincerity, "that I genuinely wish things had been different. This wasn't what I wanted." His lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Clifford Brann, put a hand on Gavin's arm, the universal attorney gesture for please stop talking, but Gavin was already in performance mode. He'd been preparing this performance for weeks. "I want you to be okay, Audrey. I mean that." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "I know you do, Gavin. That's what makes this so interesting." He blinked. Just once, but she caught it. Patricia slid the papers in front of her. Audrey read every page, all 47 of them, while both sets of attorneys sat in silence. Gavin checked his phone twice. She noticed. She noticed everything now. When she reached the final page, she picked up the pen, signed her name in the precise, controlled signature of a woman who had once signed off on million-dollar trades, and set the pen down. "Done," she said. Gavin exhaled. It was almost imperceptible, but she heard it, that tiny release of tension, that quiet victory breath. He had been holding it together for the cameras, for the room, for the performance, and now that it was over, that small sound escaped him before he could catch it. She stood, picked up her bag, and buttoned her coat. "Audrey." He said her name like a period at the end of a sentence. "I genuinely hope you land on your feet." She looked at him, then really looked at him for the first time in months, and what she felt was not grief. It was not even anger. It was something far more useful. It was clarity. "I will," she said, and she walked out. She drove the 2018 Honda to a Marriott in Bellevue and paid for a week with her card, which left her with roughly $3,000 in the world. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed and did not have the breakdown she had been half expecting. Instead, she opened her laptop, pulled up a spreadsheet she had been building in secret for 8 weeks, and got to work. The spreadsheet was titled simply Position. She had started building it the night she understood, truly understood down in her bones that the marriage was over. Not when Gavin first suggested they take a step back. Not when she found the encrypted emails on his personal laptop that she was not supposed to have seen. Not even when the attorneys got involved. She understood it was over the night Gavin sat across from her at their dining table, sipped his wine, and said in a voice that was almost kind, "You know you gave up everything to be here, and I don't think you even noticed." He meant it as a wound. She felt it as one for about 10 seconds, and then something shifted. Because he was right. She had given up everything, and if she had done it once, she could build everything again. She had done it before. She just needed a door. She opened her email and composed a message to Dean Ackworth. It was 3 sentences long. "Dean, I'm out of the marriage. I need a conversation." She sent it, closed the laptop, and went to sleep for 11 hours, the first real sleep she'd had in 4 months. Dean Ackworth called at 7:15 the next morning. She answered on the first ring. "I heard," he said without preamble. He was that kind of person, 62 years old, former head of structured products at Goldman, allergic to small talk. "How bad is it?" "Honda and $4,000. A pause. "He got it all." "Through holding entities and a prenup I signed when I was 29 and in love," she said. "Yes." "What do you need?" She had been thinking about that question since she sent the email. She knew the answer precisely. "I need an introduction. Not charity. Not a favor. An introduction to the right room where I can earn my way back in on my own terms." Dean was quiet for a moment. She could hear him thinking she'd always been able to hear him think even over the phone. "There is someone," he said slowly. "But I want to be careful how I say this, Audrey, because he is not an easy situation. I don't need easy." "I know you don't. That's why I'm considering it." Another pause. "His name is Nathaniel Cross. You've heard of him." She had. Everyone in finance had heard of Nathaniel Cross. He was the kind of figure who existed in the industry the way mountains exist in a landscape, inevitable, immovable, occasionally catastrophic if you got too close. Cross Industries had started as a small private equity shop in Chicago 20 years ago and had become through a combination of aggressive acquisition and what financial journalists usually described as unconventional strategy, which was polite language for methods that were technically legal but made people uncomfortable, one of the most feared turnaround operations in the country. Nathaniel Cross had taken 11 failing companies in 7 years and rebuilt 9 of them into profitable entities. The other 2 he had stripped for parts, which had made him very unpopular with a certain set of people, and very, very rich. He was also, by every account she'd ever read, an extraordinarily difficult man to work for. "Dean," she said, "set up the meeting. You understand what you're walking into." "I understand exactly what I'm walking into," she said. "That's the point." The meeting with Nathaniel Cross did not go the way she expected. She had prepared extensively market analysis, a strategic brief on 3 of his current portfolio companies, a read on 2 potential acquisitions that she had identified through public filings and industry relationships she'd quietly maintained even through the housewife years. She arrived 15 minutes early, in a blue suit she had pressed the night before, in the Marriott bathroom, her hair pulled back, her notes memorized rather than carried. His assistant, a young woman named Yolanda, who had the calm efficiency of someone who had survived many storms, looked at Audrey's appointment slip and said, "He's running late, possibly 20 minutes. "That's fine," Audrey said. 40 minutes later, she was still waiting. She sat in the reception area and did not check her phone, did not pace, did not do any of the small anxious things that people do when they are nervous. She sat with her hands folded and reviewed the numbers in her head. When the door to his office finally opened, Nathaniel Cross walked through it ahead of a man in an expensive suit who was trying to keep up with him and talking very fast about market conditions. Cross was younger than she'd imagined, early 50s, built like someone who still took the stairs, dark eyes that moved fast. He stopped when he saw her. "You're the Ackworth referral," he said. "Audrey Hale," she said, standing. "Yes." He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at a balance sheet, quickly, completely already forming conclusions. "You waited 40 minutes. "The meeting was worth waiting for," she said. "I assumed." Something flickered in his expression, not quite a smile. "Come in," he said. He closed the door himself. Jatasig. The interview lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. She knew because she checked the time when she walked out. It was the most demanding professional conversation she had ever sat through. More demanding in some ways than any client presentation or trading floor crisis she had navigated in her Merrill years, because Nathaniel Cross did not ask the questions you expected. He did not ask about her resume. He didn't ask about her time out of the industry. He asked her about the 2008 crisis, not what she had done during it, but what she thought the models had missed and why. He asked her to walk him through the valuation methodology on a company called Vestry Holdings that was in his current portfolio, giving her nothing but the name and a yellow legal pad. He asked her what she would do in the first 90 days if she were running the company. She gave him 94 minutes of uninterrupted, precise, occasionally uncomfortable analysis because she had been reading Vestry Holdings' public filings for 6 weeks on the theory that preparation was the only currency she had left. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Where have you been for 12 years?" he said. "Married," she said. "To someone who didn't deserve you, I'm guessing." "To someone who underestimated me," she said, "which is a different thing, and which is also no longer relevant." He studied her. "I'll be straight with you," he said. "I don't do sympathy hires. I don't do second chances as charity. If you come into my operation, you perform, or you're gone. I don't care about your circumstances. I care about what you can do." "Good," she said, "because I don't want sympathy. I want a platform." "What kind of platform?" "The kind where I can work, learn, and prove myself in 18 months to the point where I am indispensable to this operation, and then we renegotiate." He stared at her. "You've been out of the industry for 12 years, he said. "I have," she said, "but the industry has not been out of me." He picked up the legal pad she had filled with her Vestry analysis and looked at it again for a long moment. "Monday, he said. "Monday, Pat," she said. She stood, picked up her bag, and extended her hand. He shook it firm, brief, direct, the handshake of someone who had long ago stopped performing politeness and had arrived at something realer. "Don't be late," he said. "I've never been late for anything that mattered," she said. She was back in the Honda by 6:15. She drove to the Marriott, sat in the parking lot for a moment, and called Patricia Wells. "I need you to do something for me," she said when Patricia picked up. "Audrey, I'm not calling about the settlement. That's done. I'm calling about something else." She paused. "I need you to hold on to a folder I'm going to send you. Don't open it yet. Don't file it. Don't reference it. Just hold it." "What's in the folder?" "Documents," she said. "Things I observed during the marriage. Transactions, shell entity structures, some correspondence I came across. I've been organizing it for 3 months." A long silence on Patricia's end. "Audrey," Patricia said carefully, "are you telling me—" "I'm telling you to hold the folder," Audrey said. "I'll tell you when to open it." She hung up, looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror for a moment, and for the first time in a very long time, she recognized the woman looking back at her. She started the car, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove toward whatever came next. Gavin Sterling was still in his victory. She would let him stay there for now. Some storms build slowly. The ones that hit hardest are the ones you never see coming. The next 6 months were the hardest work she had done in her adult life, and she had once pulled 30-hour shifts during a liquidity crisis that wiped $2 billion off a bond portfolio in 72 hours. Cross Industries was nothing like the structured, hierarchical world of investment banking. It was faster, rougher, less forgiving of hesitation. Nathaniel Cross moved like a man who had decided that most meetings were a waste of time and most excuses were a form of lying, and he expected the people around him to operate accordingly. On her third day, he dropped a 300-page due diligence file on her desk at 7 a.m. and said, "I need a 15-page executive summary by noon with your recommendation." She looked at the file. "What's the deal?" "Failing logistics company in Phoenix, 18 million revenue, 35 million debt. Their largest shareholder wants out, and they've got 90 days before the creditors move." "Why am I doing this and not your existing team?" He looked at her. "Because I want to see how you think under pressure with no context. Your existing team already has opinions. I don't always want opinions. Sometimes I want analysis. And if my recommendation is wrong, then I'll tell you exactly why it's wrong and you'll learn something. If your recommendation is right, same thing." He walked away. Noon hail. She delivered 12 pages at 11:41. He read them in her presence without a word for 11 minutes. Then he put them down and said, "Your debt restructuring framework is correct. Your exit timeline is too conservative by about 30%, and you missed the real problem, which is the labor contract." "The labor contract," she repeated. "Page 247 of the due diligence file," he said. "The company has a collective bargaining agreement that auto-renews in 14 months with a guaranteed 12% wage increase they cannot service with current revenue. That contract is the boulder in the road. Everything else is noise." She had missed it. She had been focused on the capital structure and skipped the operational details. "I'll go back and—" "No," he said. "I told you, you learn and you move forward. I'll have Yolanda send you the Phoenix files. Full picture this time. I want a complete memo by Friday." She nodded. "And Hale?" He paused at his office door. 12 pages at 11:41 is the right instinct. Never pad the deck to make it look thorough. Thorough is in the thinking, not the page count. She wrote that down. She wrote a lot of things down those first weeks. Call. She had moved out of the Marriott by the end of the first month. She found a furnished studio apartment in a building near the Cross Industries office, small enough that she could hear the radiator thinking at night with a window that looked out at a parking structure. It cost her $1,100 a month, which was approximately what she used to spend on wine and dinner in a good week during the marriage. She did not think about the Sterling house on its lake. She thought about the Phoenix Logistics Company and the Vestry Holdings restructuring and the patterns she was beginning to see in the way Nathaniel Cross selected his targets. Not random, not purely opportunistic, but built on a specific read of market cycles that she was slowly, carefully reverse engineering. She called Dean every Sunday morning. "You sound different," he said 3 months in. "Different how?" "Like you're standing up straighter," he said. "Even on the phone." She thought about that for a moment. "I feel like I've been asleep for 12 years, she said. "And I'm annoyed that I let it happen, and I'm done being annoyed about it, so I'm just working." "That's healthy," he said. "It's necessary," she said. There was a pause. "Have you heard anything about Gavin?" she asked. "I try not to follow Sterling Industries," Dean said carefully. "But yes, some things are reaching the surface." She waited. "Some questions," he said, "from some of the right people, about some of the structures he's set up over the last few years. Nothing public yet, but questions." "Good," she said, and meant it. "Has some fact." The twist came on a Tuesday in early November, 7 months after she had walked out of Gavin Sterling's conference room with a signed settlement and nothing else. She was at her desk at 6:45 in the morning, running numbers on a London acquisition that Cross Industries was quietly circling a mid-sized asset management firm that was hemorrhaging talent and had a real estate subsidiary that was almost certainly worth twice what the market thought when Nathaniel Cross appeared in her doorway. He rarely stopped in her doorway. He either walked past or walked in. He stood in the doorway. "Tell me something," he said. She looked up. "What do you need?" "Your ex-husband," he said. "Sterling Industries. How well do you know his operation?" She set down her pen. "Why?" He walked into her office, closed the door behind him, and sat down in the chair across from her desk. "Because," he said, "I just got a call from a colleague at Pemberton Capital. They've been doing preliminary diligence on a European deal that involves one of Sterling's entities, a Luxembourg shell that is supposed to be a legitimate investment vehicle, and their analyst found something." She was very still. "What did they find?" she said. He looked at her directly. "How are you with that question given the circumstances?" "I'm completely fine with that question," she said. "What did they find?" "The Luxembourg entity has no genuine business operations," he said. "It is a pass-through, and the money flowing through it, 8 figures over several years, appears to be coming from brokerage accounts that are nominally owned by clients of Sterling's advisory arm. But the clients, when Pemberton traced them, do not appear to know about these accounts." The room was very quiet. "He's been using client funds," she said. "It appears that way. Pemberton doesn't want the publicity of being the one to surface this. They have their own exposure to manage, but they want someone to know, someone who might have additional context." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her bottom desk drawer, took out a manila envelope, and set it on the desk between them. "I have additional context," she said. Nathaniel Cross looked at the envelope. Then he looked at her. "How long have you had this?" "I started assembling it about 9 months ago," she said. "When I found the first set of inconsistencies in his personal accounts during a period when I still had access to his home office systems. I didn't know exactly what it was at the time. I've had an attorney holding the documents since the day of the signing." "And you didn't use it in the divorce?" "I didn't have enough yet," she said. "And I didn't want to use it in the divorce. I wanted—" She stopped. "What?" he said. "I wanted it to be bigger than the divorce," she said. "I wanted it to be what it actually is." He picked up the envelope, turned it over in his hands without opening it. "Audrey," he said, and it was the first time he had used her first name in 7 months. "Do you understand what this sets in motion?" "Yes," she said. "I've thought about very little else for 9 months." "You've been working here for 7 months, performing at a level that frankly has surprised me in the best possible way while carrying this." He held up the envelope, while knowing this was sitting in a lawyer's office waiting. "Yes." He set the envelope down. "All right," he said. "Then here is what we are going to do." She leaned forward slightly. "We are going to do this correctly," he said. "Not hastily, not emotionally, not in a way that backfires because of procedural errors or because someone can argue you had a personal motivation that compromised the documentation. We are going to bring in the right people, my legal team, your attorney, possibly a forensic accountant I trust, and we are going to build this into something airtight." "And the final divorce hearing," she said. "The financial review is scheduled for April." "I know," he said. "We have time. But Audrey—" He looked at her steadily. "When this lands, it lands on Gavin Sterling like a building. Are you prepared for that?" She thought about the conference room on the 41st floor, the way he had slid the papers toward her, the victory breath. "Yes?" she said. "Then we get to work," he said and stood. He paused at the door. "One more thing," he said. "Yes." "The London deal, the asset management firm. Your analysis was right. The real estate subsidiary is undervalued by at least 40%, and I think there's a restructuring play that could make this very interesting. I want you leading the London due diligence team." She blinked. "You want me to lead?" "You've been ready for 3 months," he said, with the slight impatience of someone who finds it frustrating when capable people underestimate themselves. "I was waiting to see if you'd ask. You didn't ask, which is either modesty or doubt. I don't have time for either one. You're leading the London team. We fly out in 2 weeks." He walked out. She sat at her desk for a moment in the quiet of her small office with the manila envelope in front of her and the radiator ticking softly in the corner. Then she picked up her phone and called Patricia Wells. "It's time to open the folder," she said. Patricia Wells called at 8:13 the following morning. Audrey was already awake, already dressed already on her second cup of coffee at the small table in her studio apartment with the Vestry Holdings file open in front of her. "I opened the folder," Patricia said. "I know. Audrey." A pause, the careful kind. "This is not small. I know that too. Some of what is in here, if it is what it appears to be, is not a civil matter. This is potentially criminal. We are talking about securities fraud, possibly wire fraud, client fund misappropriation at a scale that the SEC would take very seriously." "Good," Audrey said. "I need you to understand the exposure this creates for you," Patricia said, her voice tightening. "If Gavin's attorneys find out you collected this documentation during the marriage, they will argue you obtained it improperly. They will make you the story. They will flip the narrative so fast, your head will spin." "Then we make sure the documentation is bulletproof before it goes anywhere," Audrey said. "That's why I called you now instead of 9 months ago." A long silence. "Nathaniel Cross is involved in this?" Patricia asked. "He has resources I don't. Legal team, forensic accountants, access to financial networks that would take me years to rebuild on my own. And he has no personal exposure to Gavin, which means his involvement is clean. And what does he get out of this?" Audrey looked out the window at the parking structure across the street, still gray in the early morning light. "He gets the person I'm becoming," she said, "and that's worth more than he knows yet." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right, send me a contact for his legal team. Let's set up a meeting before the end of the week." Audrey wrote down 3 things after she hung up. Not feelings, not fears. 3 action items numbered with deadlines. That was the only kind of thinking she could afford right now. She had learned that in the first weeks at Cross Industries. Emotion was information. You noted it, you filed it, and then you went back to work. She went back to work. The forensic accountant Nathaniel brought in was a small, precise woman named Elaine Marsh, who had spent 11 years at the IRS before moving to private practice, and who had the quiet, relentless energy of someone who genuinely loved finding things that were hidden. She met with Audrey and Patricia on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room at Cross Industries, reviewed the folder contents for 45 minutes without speaking, and then looked up and said simply, "This is a thread, and if we pull it correctly, the whole sweater comes apart." "How long?" Audrey asked. "To do this right, 8 to 10 weeks. Maybe less if the Luxembourg entity's counterparties are as sloppy as this initial documentation suggests." She tapped the folder. "Where did you get the account statements?" "During the marriage, I handled all household financial organization," Audrey said. "Gavin trusted me to file. He stopped seeing me as a financial professional years ago. He saw me as a wife who filed things." She paused. That was a significant miscalculation on his part. Elaine looked at her for a moment with something that was almost a smile. "I'll say." "Can you work within the legal parameters Patricia outlined?" Audrey asked. "Everything I find will be independently sourced and verifiable," Elaine said. "Your documentation gives me the map. I'll do my own excavation. By the time we're finished, what you found in that filing cabinet will be a footnote." Audrey leaned back in her chair. "Then let's begin," she said. 2 weeks later, she was on a plane to London. The London due diligence team was 4 people: Audrey Across Industries analyst named Marcus, who was 26 years old and terrifyingly good with quantitative models, a senior associate named Claire, who had done 3 previous deals with Cross, and a local attorney named James Whitfield, who knew the regulatory landscape so well he seemed to dream in compliance frameworks. They set up in a rented office space and worked 16-hour days for the first week, and on the 8th day Audrey found what she had suspected was there. The real estate subsidiary, a company called Meridian Property Holdings, had a portfolio of commercial assets in Manchester and Birmingham that were being carried on the books at values that hadn't been updated since 2019. The world had changed significantly since 2019. The actual current market value of those assets based on comparable transactions Marcus pulled in one 12-hour session that left him pale with exhaustion was 43% higher than book value. More importantly, there was a tenant in the Manchester portfolio, a logistics company that was quietly in the process of a significant expansion, whose lease renewal sitting unsigned in a file Audrey found during document review would lock in cash flows that transformed Meridian from a middling asset into something genuinely exceptional. She called Nathaniel at 10 p.m. London time, 4 p.m. Seattle. "The Manchester lease," she said without preamble. "Tell me," he said. She told him. She walked him through the numbers precisely without inflation, without hedging. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What do you need to close this?" he said. "I need you to authorize Marcus to run 3 more comparable sets, and I need Whitfield to confirm the lease renewal can be executed before any acquisition announcement. If both of those check out by Friday, we have a deal worth making." "You'll have authorization in the morning," he said. "Good work, Hale." He hung up. She sat in the rented office, the city lights of London visible through the window behind her, Marcus asleep at his desk with his jacket over his shoulders, and she felt something she had not felt in 12 years. Not happiness exactly, something older and steadier than happiness. She felt like herself. She called Dean. "It's late there," he said. "I don't care," she said. "I found something in London, something real." "Tell me," she told him. He listened without interrupting, which was the highest form of respect Dean Ackworth offered anyone. And when she finished, he said, "You know what this reminds me of? The Hendricks analysis, 2007. You were the only one on the floor who saw what the underlying collateral was actually worth." "I remembered that," she said quietly. "I thought about it when I was pulling the comparable data. I thought I've done this before. I know how to do this." "You never stopped knowing," Dean said. "You just stopped being asked." A silence opened between them, the comfortable kind. "How's the other thing going?" he said. He always referred to it as the other thing, careful even on the phone. "Elaine has been working for 2 weeks," she said. "She called me this morning. She found 2 additional Luxembourg entities that weren't in my original documentation. Same pattern, different client accounts." "How much?" "She wouldn't give me a number yet. She said she needed to verify one more layer. But Dean—" She stopped. "What?" She said the word significant 3 times in a 4-minute phone call. Elaine Marsh does not use words for decoration. A pause. "Gavin," Dean said, and the name sounded different when he said it heavier, like something being set down from a great height. "Gavin," she agreed. "Are you sure you're ready for what this becomes?" "I was ready 9 months ago," she said. "I've been waiting 9 months for everyone else to catch up." She flew back to Seattle on a Sunday and walked into Cross Industries at 7 a.m. Monday with a 38-page London deal memo that she dropped on Nathaniel's desk before he arrived. When he came in at 7:30 and found it, he stood in his doorway and read the executive summary before he even sat down. Then he looked up and found her at her desk across the open floor. "When did you write this?" he called across the space. "On the plane. Both ways. Outbound was research. Return was synthesis." He looked at the memo again, then he set it down and walked over to her desk, which he almost never did. Nathaniel Cross was a man who made the work come to him. "The lease renewal angle," he said. "That's the whole game." "That's the whole game," she agreed. "How long until we can move?" "Whitfield says the lease can be executed within 45 days of an LOI. If we move this week, we can have the deal structured before the end of the quarter." He pulled a chair from the adjacent desk and sat down across from her, which felt in the context of who Nathaniel Cross was and how he operated roughly equivalent to another person getting down on one knee. "I want to talk about your role going forward," he said. She waited. "When this London deal closes," he said, "I want to restructure your position. You've been working on an associate-level compensation structure that made sense in October. It doesn't make sense now, and I want to formalize your involvement in deal origination, not just analysis, not just supporting the existing pipeline. I want you generating your own targets." "I've already identified 3, she said. He blinked. One of the rare times she had ever seen him blink. "Of course you have," he said. "Send them to me." She sent them that afternoon. He responded within the hour with 2 words, "Let's talk." They talked for 90 minutes. By the end of the conversation, the 3 companies she had identified, 2 in the Pacific Northwest, 1 in the Southeast, were in the Cross Industries preliminary pipeline, under her name. That night, she sat in her studio apartment with a glass of wine, the first glass of wine she had allowed herself since the divorce, because she had made herself a rule that she would not celebrate until there was something real to celebrate. And she thought about the fact that 9 months ago, she had sat in a hotel room with $4,000 and a Honda and a folder of documents she wasn't sure would amount to anything. She thought about Gavin's face across the conference room table, the hand on her wrist, the papers pushed toward her like a dismissed napkin, the laugh. She finished the wine, washed the glass, and went to bed. Elaine Marsh called on a Wednesday morning in February, 4 months after they had first sat down in that conference room. Audrey was in a breakfast meeting with Marcus and Claire preparing for a second round of negotiation calls with the London attorneys, and when she saw Elaine's name on her phone, she excused herself immediately and walked into the hallway. "Tell me," she said. "I'm ready to present the full picture," Elaine said. Her voice was level the way voices get when they are carrying something very large and very carefully. "I need you, your attorney, and ideally someone from Cross's legal team in a room together. This week, if possible." "How big?" Audrey said. "Audrey," a pause. "I have documented 14 separate client accounts from which funds were redirected through the Luxembourg structure over a period of approximately 6 years. The total is in excess of $22 million. The hallway was very quiet. $22 million, Audrey said. "That is conservative. There are additional transactions I am still tracing that could push that number significantly higher. But $22 million is what I can prove right now completely without gaps." Audrey leaned against the wall. She had known. She had known from the moment she first found the account statements in Gavin's home office, the ones she was never supposed to find because she was just the wife who filed things. She had known it was bad, but $22 million was not bad. $22 million was federal. "Thursday," she said. "Can you be here Thursday?" "I'll be there," Elaine said. Audrey went back into the breakfast meeting, sat down and picked up right where she had left off, discussing the Manchester lease renewal timeline with a precision that made Marcus glance at her sideways, because he had worked with her long enough to notice when she was carrying something. After the meeting, he lingered. "You okay?" he said. "I'm excellent," she said. He nodded, sensing correctly that this was not an invitation to continue the conversation, and gathered his papers. She waited until he was gone, and then she opened her desk drawer, took out a photograph she had put there 3 months ago and had not looked at since a photo from their 5th wedding anniversary. Gavin with his arm around her, both of them smiling at the camera at some charity event in a room full of people who now believed everything he told them, and she looked at it for a long moment. Then she put it face down in the drawer and closed it. The Thursday meeting lasted 3.5 hours. Elaine presented everything with the calm, methodical clarity of a surgeon explaining a procedure. Here is the tissue. Here is the damage. Here is the instrument that caused it. Cross's lead attorney, a formidable woman named Sasha Ivanova, who had built her reputation in financial crime litigation, asked questions that were so precise, they made Audrey feel like she was watching a masterclass in legal thinking in real time. When Elaine finished, Sasha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The final divorce hearing is scheduled for April." "April 14th, Patricia confirmed. Sasha looked at Audrey. "You understand that if we bring this to the SEC before the hearing becomes almost irrelevant from a financial standpoint. His assets will be frozen. Everything on the table. I understand, Audrey said. And if we time it to surface at the hearing itself... Sasha paused. That's what I want, Audrey said. Everyone in the room looked at her. I want him to walk into that courtroom believing he has already won, she said. I want him at maximum confidence, and then I want everything to land at once. Sasha studied her for a long moment. That's a significant strategic risk. If anything leaks early, nothing is going to leak, Audrey said, because the 4 people in this room are the only ones who know the full picture, and none of us have any interest in leaking it. Another silence. It's also, Sasha said slowly, a very effective approach from a legal positioning standpoint. A defendant who has just presented himself as the aggrieved party in a divorce proceeding in front of a judge on the record and is then immediately confronted with evidence of federal-level financial fraud that is a defendant who has no ground left to stand on. That's the idea, Audrey said. Nathaniel, who had been sitting at the end of the table saying nothing for the past 3 hours, spoke for the first time. April 14th, he said. April 14th, Audrey said. He nodded once. Then we have work to do. She walked out of that meeting and straight back to her desk because there was a conference call with the London attorneys in 40 minutes, and the Manchester lease needed to be finalized before the end of the week, and she had 2 new acquisition targets to research and a memo to write, and 3 months of the hardest, most exhilarating work of her life still ahead of her. She thought about Gavin exactly once more that day, just briefly. A flash. She thought about the way he had laughed, and then she opened her laptop and got back to work, because the best revenge she had ever encountered was the kind that built something real while the other person was busy celebrating too early. March arrived cold and fast. The London deal moved into final negotiation. Elaine submitted a preliminary report to Sasha that Sasha described as exceptionally well constructed, in the tone of someone who did not give compliments easily. Patricia filed the motions for the April hearing, and on a Tuesday in mid-March, Nathaniel knocked on Audrey's office doorframe and said, I'm flying to London for the closing. I want you there. She looked up. When? Week of the 24th. We'll be back by the 31st at the latest. The hearing is April 14th, she said. I know when the hearing is, he said. We'll be back in time. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, the smallest, most human hesitation, the one that slipped out before she could catch it. Audrey, he said, and his voice had something in it she didn't often hear from him. Something almost careful. You have built something real here. In 8 months you have built something genuinely real. The London deal closes because of you. The pipeline you've created is worth more than you understand yet. Whatever happens on April 14th, and I believe what happens on April 14th is going to be significant. It is not the foundation of what you're building. You are. She looked at him. That's the most words you've said to me at one time, she said. Something crossed his face that was almost a smile. Don't get used to it. Noted, she said. He walked away. She turned back to her screen. April 14th was 3 weeks out. The London closing was in 10 days. Elaine's full report was complete and under seal with Sasha. Patricia had the hearing documents ready. Everything was in position. Gavin Sterling, as far as any of them could determine, was still sleeping soundly in his victory. Still managing his advisory firm, still entertaining clients on the boat he'd bought the summer before the divorce, still telling anyone who would listen the version of the story in which he was the reasonable one, and she had simply not been equipped for the life they had built together. Still underestimating the quiet woman who had signed those papers and walked away. She let him. She had become very good over these 8 months at being underestimated. It turned out to be the most powerful position she had ever occupied, the position of someone. No one is watching someone who has already been discounted, someone who has been handed the thing that looks like a loss. Because when no one is watching, you can build anything. And she had been building. The London closing happened on a Wednesday. It took 11 hours, 2 rounds of legal revisions, 1 moment at hour 7, when the counterparty's lead attorney tried to renegotiate a term that had been settled for 3 weeks, and Audrey looked at him across the table and said quietly, and without a single degree of warmth, "That term is not on the table. If you attempt to reopen it again, we will interpret that as a signal that your client is not serious about closing, and we will act accordingly." The attorney looked at Nathaniel. Expecting him to soften it, Nathaniel said nothing. The term stayed. At 8:47 p.m. London time, the deal closed. Marcus made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a collapse into his chair. Claire shook hands with Whitfield. Nathaniel stood at the head of the table and looked at the signed documents for a moment with the expression of a man who had won enough times to know that the feeling didn't last, and you had to observe it carefully before it passed. Then he looked at Audrey. She was already looking at her phone. Not celebrating, calculating. The closing meant the restructuring phase began immediately, and she had a timeline in her head that she needed to pressure test against the Manchester operational calendar. "Hail," Nathaniel said. She looked up. 10 seconds, he said. "Allow yourself 10 seconds. She looked around the room. At Marcus, who had worked himself to the edge of his limits for 6 weeks and earned every dollar Cross Industries would ever pay him. At Claire, who had navigated 3 rounds of due diligence complications without losing her composure once. At Whitfield, who had told her on day 2 in London that he'd done 40 deals in his career, and this was the most efficiently run process he'd been part of. She allowed herself 10 seconds. Then she said, "We need to talk about the restructuring timeline before we leave this building." And the room laughed and she smiled, and they got back to work. They flew back to Seattle on Friday morning. The hearing was in 10 days. She spent the weekend doing 2 things simultaneously, which was a skill she had developed out of pure necessity over the past 8 months. She reviewed the Meridian restructuring plan with Marcus over video call on Saturday morning. And on Saturday afternoon, she drove to Patricia's office and sat across from her attorney and Sasha Ivanova and went through the courtroom strategy one final time. The way you check the instruments on a plane before you take off. Not because you expect them to be wrong, but because certainty costs nothing and overconfidence costs everything. Sasha had a presentation prepared, 31 exhibits. Elaine's forensic report now expanded to cover 19 client accounts and a total of $31 million in redirected funds. The number had grown as Elaine had predicted it might as she pulled more threads. 3 expert witnesses were on call. 2 former Sterling Industries employees had provided sworn affidavits, people Audrey had never met, people Elaine had found during her independent excavation, people who had left Gavin's firm quietly and uncomfortably and had been waiting. It turned out for someone to ask them the right questions. "He has no idea," Patricia said at one point. It wasn't a question. "He believes the hearing is a formality," Sasha said. His attorneys filed their final asset documentation last week. Everything structured exactly the way it was at the original signing. They're not expecting a challenge. They're expecting a rubber stamp. Audrey thought about that for a moment. Gavin in his office right now, probably on the phone with a client, probably planning his weekend, probably feeling like a man who had closed a chapter cleanly and moved on. "Good," she said. Sasha looked at her. "I want to make sure you're prepared for how he's going to react, in the room, when it starts." "I'm prepared." "He's going to get angry, Audrey. Real anger. He's not going to understand what's happening fast enough to control his reaction. And that's actually useful for us. But it's also going to be, I grew up with his anger," Audrey said. "It doesn't frighten me anymore." A silence. "All right," Sasha said. "Then we're ready." On Sunday evening, Audrey sat in her studio apartment and did something she had not done in months. She called her sister Rachel in Portland. They had spoken only a handful of times since the divorce. Not because they were estranged, but because Audrey had been in a mode of deep, focused construction that left very little room for anything that wasn't directly essential. And Rachel, who knew her sister better than almost anyone, had respected that without being asked. "April 14th. Audrey said when Rachel picked up. "I know," Rachel said. "I've had it on my calendar for months." "I want you there." A pause. "Of course I'll be there. Audrey Wild Horses could not keep me out of that courtroom." "I need you to sit in the gallery and not react," Audrey said. "Whatever happens, don't react. Don't make a sound. I need to be able to look at you and see calm." "I can do that." "Rachel." She stopped. "What?" "It's going to be bigger than you think," she said. "What happens in that room? It's going to be—" She searched for the word. "It's going to be real." Her sister was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" "I'm the best I've been in 12 years, Audrey said. "That's not an exaggeration. I'm the best I've been in 12 years and I need about 4 more days to get through this last piece, and then I think I'm going to sit somewhere quiet for about an hour and feel everything I've been not feeling for 8 months. And then I'm going to London to run a company restructuring," she said. "So the window is small." Rachel laughed, and it was the real kind, the kind that meant, "I see you, and I'm proud of you," without either of them having to say it. "I'll be in the front row," Rachel said. Monday arrived the way the last week before something significant always arrives faster than it should, with a slightly unreal quality to each day, like the hours were aware of what was coming. Audrey worked. She worked with the same focus and intensity she had maintained for 8 months because the work was real and the work mattered, and she refused to let the approaching hearing destabilize what she had built. She was on calls with Marcus about Manchester. She was reviewing the 2 new acquisition targets she had brought to Nathaniel. She was at her desk at 7 every morning and rarely left before 7 in the evening, and the rhythm of that felt like solid ground under her feet. On Wednesday, 6 days before the hearing, Gavin Sterling called her cell phone. She stared at his name on the screen for 3 full rings. Then she answered. "Gavin." "Audrey." His voice was smooth, the social voice, the one he used at charity dinners. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. What do you need, Gavin?" A small pause. "I heard you've been working with Nathaniel Cross." She said nothing. "Small world," he said, and she could hear the calculation under the casualness. "I've crossed paths with Cross in the industry a few times. He has quite a reputation." "He does," she said. "I just wanted to reach out," he said before the hearing, as a courtesy. "I wanted to make sure you understood that I have no interest in making next week difficult for you. This has all been very hard, and I think we can move through the final piece with some mutual respect and get on with our lives." She understood exactly what this call was. He was nervous about something, maybe a rumor, maybe a conversation, maybe just the instinct of a man who had done enough wrong to develop a permanent background anxiety that never fully went away. She gave him nothing. "I appreciate that, Gavin," she said in a voice as smooth as his. "I feel the same way. I think next week will be very clarifying for everyone." A beat. "Right," he said. "Well, good. I'll see you there then." "You will," she said. She hung up, sat very still for a moment, and then called Sasha. "He called me," she said. "Wenfao just now, fishing. He suspects something, but he doesn't know what." Sasha was quiet for a second. "Does this change anything on your end?" "No," Audrey said. "But tighten the information perimeter. Anyone on our team who has outside contact with Sterling Industries connections needs to know that this week requires absolute silence." "Already done," Sasha said. "Since last week." "Good." She put her phone down and looked at the wall for a moment. Then she thought 9 days ago she had been in London closing a deal worth more than Gavin would see in the next 5 years of his operation. And he was calling her nervous, trying to read the room through the wife he had discarded. She picked up her work and continued. Thursday brought the twist she had not anticipated. Elaine called at 2 in the afternoon, and the tone of her voice was different from any previous call. Not alarmed. Elaine Marsh did not do alarmed, but heightened in a way that made Audrey put down everything else immediately. "We have a development," Elaine said. "Tell me." One of the client account holders whose funds were redirected through the Luxembourg structure, a man named Howard Breck, 74 years old, retired engineer from Tacoma, he contacted the SEC independently this morning before our filing. Audrey went very still. "He what?" "He contacted the SEC. He had apparently been conducting his own inquiry for several months after noticing discrepancies in his quarterly statements. His inquiry was less organized than ours and less documented, but he went to the SEC. Does he know about us?" "No, he has no idea we exist or that there is a concurrent legal action being prepared. He acted entirely independently." Audrey pressed her fingers against the edge of her desk. "Elaine," she said, "what does this mean for April 14th? "It means," Elaine said carefully, "that we may not control the timeline anymore. If the SEC opens a formal inquiry based on Breck's complaint, there is a possibility, not a certainty, but a possibility that they move before the hearing, which would mean Gavin walks into that courtroom already knowing." How quickly does the SEC typically move on an initial complaint? Varies significantly. Could be weeks, could be months. But this week, a pause. I don't know. Audrey stood up from her desk, walked to the window, and looked at the parking structure she had been looking at for 8 months without ever really seeing it. "Call Sasha," she said, "right now, and get me on that call." The three-way call lasted 47 minutes. By the end of it, Sasha had identified a legal mechanism to file a formal evidence submission with the SEC directly preemptively that would establish their timeline, their documentation, and their position as prior to the Breck complaint, which would actually strengthen the overall case while ensuring that whatever the SEC chose to do, it would be working from Sasha and Elaine's vastly more comprehensive foundation. "We file tomorrow," Sasha said, "first thing." "Does this give Gavin advance warning before the hearing?" Audrey asked. "Not necessarily. SEC initial filings are not public record. His attorneys would be notified if and when a formal investigation is opened, which typically takes weeks after the initial submission. We can still hit the hearing date." "Then we file tomorrow," Audrey said. "And we hit the hearing date." She called Nathaniel after the call ended. "There's a development," she said and told him. He listened without interrupting, which was his way, and when she finished, he said, "Are you still confident in the April 14th timeline?" "Yes," she said. "Then I'm confident in it," he said, and that was all. She realized somewhere in the middle of that week that she had stopped thinking about Nathaniel Cross the way she had thought about him when she first walked into his office as a force to be navigated, a powerful figure to be managed, a platform to leverage. She thought about him now the way she thought about Dean, as someone whose judgment she genuinely respected and who genuinely respected hers, and that was a rarer thing in the professional world than it should have been. She did not examine that realization for long. There was too much else to do. Sasha filed on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, they had a confirmation receipt. The documentation, $31 million, 19 accounts, 6 years. A forensic report that Elaine had described as the most comprehensive private financial fraud analysis she had produced in 20 years of practice was now in federal hands. The hearing was in 4 days. On Saturday, Nathaniel called her at 9 a.m. "I want to talk about transportation," he said. She blinked. "Transportation?" "To the courthouse, April 14th. I was going to drive," she said, "or have Patricia pick me up." "You're not driving the Honda," he said, and his voice had a flatness that was not unkindness, but was pure certainty. "You're not arriving at that courthouse in any way that allows Gavin Sterling or his attorneys to see anything other than the full picture of what you have become in the past 8 months. I want you arriving in a way that is unambiguous." She understood him. "The Gulfstream is available," he said. "We'll land at Boeing Field and transfer directly to the courthouse." "Nathaniel," she said, "the courthouse is in Seattle. We're in Seattle." "Then we fly to Portland Friday night and fly back Saturday morning," he said. "The geometry of it doesn't matter. What matters is how you arrive." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not wrong," she said. "I'm rarely wrong about these things," he said. "Be at the airport Friday at 6. On Friday evening, she stood on the tarmac at a private terminal in a white suit she had bought in London, the week of the closing white, because she had thought about it for weeks, thought about what color said in a room, thought about what she wanted. Gavin Sterling's first image of her to be when she walked through that courtroom door and she looked at the Gulfstream G650 sitting 50 feet away in the evening light. A year ago, she had been signing papers with $4,000 in her account and a Honda in the parking lot. Patricia appeared at her elbow. "Ready?" "I've been ready for 8 months," Audrey said. They boarded. She did not sleep on the short flight. She sat with a glass of water and reviewed her notes one final time, not because she needed to. She knew every exhibit number, every account figure, every date in Elaine's report by heart, but because the reviewing was itself a ritual. A way of honoring the work, a way of reminding herself that every single page of what she was about to deliver had been earned. The plane landed back in Seattle at 7:40 Saturday morning, April 14th. She was in the transfer car by 7:55, Patricia beside her, Sasha on her phone with final confirmations, Rachel texting from the courthouse steps where she was already waiting. Rachel's text said front row, not reacting. But Audrey, I just saw Gavin walk in with his team. He looked so confident. Audrey typed back, good. The car pulled up to the courthouse at 8:17. She stepped out in her white suit, her mother's pearl earrings, her hair pulled back with the precision of someone who understood that presentation was a form of argument. The morning was cold and clear, and the kind of sharp that makes everything feel very immediate. She walked up the courthouse steps. She did not look around for Gavin. She did not scan the lobby when she entered. She walked with Patricia and Sasha directly toward the courtroom, and she thought about exactly one thing, which was the moment 9 months ago when she had sat in the parking lot of a Marriott hotel and opened a spreadsheet titled Position, and understood that her real life was not behind her. It was ahead. She pushed open the courtroom door. Gavin was already at his table, flanked by Clifford Brann and 2 other attorneys, and he was laughing at something one of them had said, the easy laugh of a man who is comfortable in his setting. He didn't look up when the door opened. She walked to her table. She set down her bag. She straightened her jacket. And then Gavin Sterling looked up. She watched it happen in real time, the sequence of reactions moving across his face like weather. First, the simple recognition, then something that was not quite surprise but close to it. His eyes moved from her face to her suit, to the composure of her posture, to Sasha Ivanova, whom he clearly recognized, to the size of the document files Patricia was arranging on the table. His smile didn't disappear all at once. It dissolved slowly the way ice thins before it breaks. Clifford Brann leaned toward him and said something in a low voice. Gavin shook his head slightly. He looked back at Audrey. She met his eyes directly and without expression for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away because she had nothing to prove to him in a look, and sat down. The judge entered at 9 o'clock sharp. The Honorable Margaret Croft, 61 years old, 22 years on the bench, a reputation for intolerance of wasted time and procedural theatrics. She sat arranged, her papers, looked briefly around the room and said, "We're here for the final hearing in Sterling versus Hale. Mr. Brann, I understand your client is seeking confirmation of the settlement terms as filed." Clifford Brann stood. "That's correct, Your Honor. The terms are straightforward and both parties signed. Your Honor." Sasha Ivanova rose from her chair. Her voice was level and authoritative. The voice of someone who had been in this room many times and was completely unintimidated by it. "Before we proceed with confirmation, the respondent wishes to introduce material evidence bearing directly on the validity of the asset disclosures made by the petitioner in the original settlement filing." The room changed. It was subtle, a slight shift in the air, a new quality of attention from the judge, a stillness from Gavin's table that was categorically different from the easy stillness of before. Clifford Brann's head turned toward Sasha with the expression of a man who has just heard a sound he didn't expect. "On what grounds?" Judge Croft said. "On the grounds," Sasha said, "that the petitioner's asset disclosures contain material omissions and misrepresentations, and that new evidence has come to light, indicating that the petitioner's financial operations during and prior to the marriage involved the systematic misappropriation of client funds through a series of offshore entities, evidence which, had it been available at the time of the original settlement, would have substantially altered the asset picture presented to this court." Clifford Brann was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The settlement was signed by both parties." "Mr. Brann," Judge Croft said, with the calm of someone who does not raise her voice because she has never needed to. "Sit down. I will hear the respondent's counsel." Brann sat. Gavin Sterling did not move. He was very still, in a way she had only seen him once before the night she told him she knew about the emails. That particular stillness. The stillness of a man who is running calculations very fast and not liking any of the numbers. "Proceed, Ms. Ivanova," the judge said. Sasha began. She spoke for 22 minutes without interruption, laying the foundation with the precision and pace of someone who understood that a judge's attention was a resource to be respected and not squandered. She introduced Elaine Marsh as an expert witness. She walked through the structure, the Luxembourg entities, the client accounts, the 6-year timeline, the $31 million. She introduced each exhibit with its number and a single clear sentence of context. At minute 11, Gavin leaned toward Clifford Brann and said something. Brann shook his head. Gavin said something else sharper. Brann put a hand on his arm, the same gesture he had used in the signing room 9 months ago, and this time Gavin shook it off. At minute 18, one of the junior attorneys at Gavin's table quietly pulled out a cell phone under the table. Sasha did not miss it. She did not pause. She continued. At minute 22, she said, "Your Honor, the respondent respectfully submits that the asset disclosures filed by the petitioner in this matter are fundamentally fraudulent, that the settlement signed by the respondent was obtained under conditions of material misrepresentation, and that the court should set aside the settlement terms and order a full and independent forensic review of the petitioner's assets and financial history." She sat down. The silence in the room lasted approximately 4 seconds. It felt longer. Judge Croft looked at Gavin's table. "Mr. Sterling, your counsel will have an opportunity to respond, but I want to be clear." She paused and looked at him directly, and her voice had a quality that Audrey recognized as the judicial equivalent of ice. "I take misrepresentation to this court with extreme seriousness. Do you understand?" Gavin Sterling opened his mouth. For the first time in 12 years of knowing him, he had nothing to say, and Audrey sat at her table in her white suit, her hands folded in front of her, her face composed and still, and she did not smile. She did not look at Rachel in the front row. She did not look at Gavin. She looked at Judge Croft, and she waited because the patience she had built over 8 months of grinding, relentless, focused work was the most powerful thing in the room, and she knew it. The man who had grabbed her wrist and told her she had nothing was sitting 10 feet away, and the ground was moving under him, and he could feel it, and there was nothing left for him to do. She had built this moment from $4,000 and a Honda and a folder of documents and the absolute refusal to be what anyone had decided she was. And it had arrived exactly on time. Clifford Brann recovered first. That was his job, to recover first, to buy time to insert procedural friction into moments that were moving too fast for his client. He stood, straightened his jacket, and said in the measured tone of a man performing confidence he did not currently feel, "Your Honor, the Respondent's Counsel has introduced a substantial volume of unverified material with no prior notice to petitioner's team. We would request a continuance to allow adequate time to review these claims before the court proceeds." Judge Croft looked at him the way experienced judges look at delay tactics, with the patience of someone who has seen every version of this move and is entirely unimpressed by any of them. "How much time are you requesting, Mr. Brann?" "60 days, Your Honor." "Denied." She said it without hesitation. "You'll have a 48-hour review period. We reconvene Thursday morning at 9. In the meantime, I am issuing a temporary freeze on all assets currently in dispute, pending review of the submitted evidence." She looked at both tables. "Is that understood?" Brann opened his mouth, closed it. "Yes, Your Honor." "Ms. Ivanova." "Understood, Your Honor. Thank you." The gavel came down. Gavin was out of his chair before the room had fully processed what had just happened. He caught Clifford Brann by the arm and pulled him toward the side of the room, and Audrey could see from 10 feet away that he was speaking in a rapid, pressured way that Brann was trying to contain with a series of small, calming gestures that were not working. She did not watch for long. She turned to Sasha. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," Sasha confirmed. "The freeze is the key win today. His attorneys cannot move anything, restructure anything, or transfer anything in the next 48 hours. Whatever he was planning to do if things went wrong in here today, he cannot do it now." Was he planning something? Sasha gave her a look that said men like Gavin Sterling are always planning something. His attorneys filed a series of asset transfer notifications 3 days ago. Standard procedure, technically within the bounds of the settlement, but the timing is, let's call it, interesting. "He was moving things," Audrey said. "He was moving things," Sasha confirmed. "The freeze stops that cold." Patricia appeared at Audrey's other side. "We need to get you out of this building before the press figures out what just happened in there. Brann will leak something to manage the narrative, and I don't want you caught in a hallway comment." "I'm not going to say anything to anyone," Audrey said. "I know you're not. But they'll try to get a reaction anyway, and a photograph of your face in a courthouse hallway becomes the story. Let the documents be the story." They moved. Through the side exit, down a corridor, out into the cold April air where the transfer car was already waiting. Rachel was there. She had gotten out ahead of them somehow, which was very Rachel. And when she saw Audrey, she did something she had promised not to do, which was immediately put both hands over her mouth and make a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Rachel," Audrey said. I know, I said I wouldn't." Rachel grabbed her by both arms. "Audrey, his face. When Sasha started talking, his face." "I know." He looked like the floor disappeared. "I know," Audrey said, and something in her voice made Rachel stop and really look at her. "Are you okay?" Rachel said. Audrey thought about that for a moment. She was standing outside a courthouse in Seattle on a cold April morning, having just watched 8 months of the most focused work of her life land exactly where she had intended it to land. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. She felt underneath everything, something she had been half afraid to acknowledge until this moment, not triumph exactly, not relief exactly, but the particular sensation of a person who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and has finally set it down in exactly the right place. "Yes," she said, "I really am." They drove back to Cross Industries. Nathaniel was not in the building. He was in a board call that had been scheduled for weeks, but he had left a note on her desk in his characteristically sparse style. 3 words handwritten on a yellow post-it. It said, "Tell me everything." She smiled at that. She sat at her desk, still in the white suit, and wrote him a 4-sentence summary. The freeze was in place. The reconvene was Thursday. Bran had requested 60 days and been denied. The asset transfer notifications he had filed 3 days ago were now blocked. He responded in 8 minutes. "Good. Come find me when the board call ends." She changed into the spare blazer she kept in her office closet and went back to work on Manchester. Because the work did not stop for courtroom drama, and because the work was also, in its own way, the point. Tuesday passed in a controlled kind of tension. Sasha's team worked through the night preparing for Thursday. Elaine was on call for any questions about the forensic documentation. On Gavin's side, according to the industry contacts that Nathaniel quietly maintained, Clifford Bran had assembled a crisis response team and was attempting to construct a counter-narrative around the legitimacy of the Luxembourg entities, arguing, apparently, that the structures were standard tax optimization vehicles and that any client fund movements were the result of documented investment agreements. Sasha called Audrey on Tuesday evening to walk through the counter-argument. "He's going to claim the clients consented," Sasha said. "Can he prove that? He's going to try to produce documentation showing signed agreements. The problem for him is that Elaine already pulled the original client files from regulatory records, and the agreements he would need to produce don't match the timeline. Some of the transfers happened before the agreement dates. Some of the signatures are, let's say the handwriting analysis is going to be an interesting conversation." "Forged?" Audrey said. "That word will be used," Sasha said carefully. "Not by us yet. By the forensic document examiner we've had reviewing the files since Monday morning." Audrey sat with that for a moment. It was one thing to know Gavin had been moving money. It was another to understand that he had apparently been creating false documentation to support it. The architecture of what he had built was not careless opportunism. It was deliberate, sustained, and methodical. She had been married to that for 12 years and had not known the full extent of it. She found that she was not surprised, and the absence of surprise told her something about the distance she had traveled. "Sasha," she said, "are we going to win on Thursday and define win?" Sasha said, "The settlement is voided. The assets are subject to proper review. The fraud is on the record." "Yes," Sasha said. "On all 3 counts, yes." "Then we're ready," Audrey said. Wednesday was the twist she had not seen coming. It arrived at 11:14 a.m. in the form of a call from a number she didn't recognize, a 202 area code, which was Washington, D.C. She almost let it go to voicemail. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Ms. Hale, this is Special Agent Dana Reyes, Financial Crimes Unit, Federal Bureau of Investigation." A pause, deliberate, professional. "Do you have a few minutes, She stood up from her desk and walked to the small conference room adjacent to her office and closed the door. "I do," she said. "We've been in contact with the SEC following their receipt of a formal evidence submission filed by your legal team last week. I want to be direct with you. This is a courtesy call, not a formal interview. We're not asking you to do anything at this moment. But I want you to know that what your team submitted has been flagged at a level of priority that requires my office to be involved." "I understand," she said. "The documentation your forensic accountant produced is frankly, it's one of the most comprehensive private sector fraud analyses my team has reviewed in recent memory. The Luxembourg structure your team identified connects to 2 other entities we have been watching for separate reasons. This is larger than your divorce proceeding, Ms. Hale, significantly larger." She sat down in one of the conference room chairs. "How much larger?" she said. "I can't give you details at this stage. What I can tell you is that the materials your team submitted have opened a window that we have been trying to find for approximately 2 years from a different direction." Another pause. "I also want to be clear that your cooperation, which has been thorough and proactive, is noted. If this proceeds the way it appears, it will precede the individuals who brought this forward will be recognized appropriately in whatever formal process follows." "Agent Reyes," she said, "I have a hearing tomorrow morning in Seattle. Does anything your office is doing intersect with that timeline in a way I should know about?" A brief silence. "Nothing we are doing will interfere with your civil proceeding tomorrow. I can tell you that. Beyond that, I'd encourage you to speak with your attorney." "I intend to," she said. "Thank you for calling." She hung up and sat in the conference room for exactly 90 seconds. Then she called Sasha. "The FBI just called me," she said. The silence on Sasha's end was approximately 2 seconds, which was long for Sasha Ivanova. "Tell me everything," Sasha said, and Audrey registered distantly that it was the same phrase Nathaniel had used, and that the people she had built around herself over these 8 months shared a particular quality. They did not waste time on shock. They moved directly to information. She told Sasha everything, word for word, as precisely as she could reconstruct it. "All right," Sasha said when she finished. "This is significant, but it doesn't change tomorrow. In fact, it strengthens tomorrow. If there is a parallel federal investigation opening, even if it's in preliminary stages, the judge needs to know that the civil proceeding exists within a larger context. Can you raise that in court?" "Carefully. I'm not going to walk in there and announce an FBI investigation that hasn't been formally opened. But I can make it clear that the documentation submitted to this court has also been provided to federal regulators, which is accurate, and which signals to Judge Croft the scale of what she's looking at." "Do it," Audrey said. She found Nathaniel at his desk at 2 p.m. and closed his office door behind her, which she almost never did. "There's a development," she said, and his eyes came up immediately from whatever he was reading. She told him about Agent Reyes. She told him about the 2 other entities, the ones the FBI had been watching separately. She told him what Sasha planned to do in court the next morning. When she finished, Nathaniel set down his pen and looked at her for a long moment. "You know what you've done," he said. It was not a question. "I pulled a thread," she said. "You pulled a thread that unraveled something that federal investigators couldn't reach from their end for 2 years," he said. "Because you were in a position no investigator could ever be in. Because you were his wife. Because he stopped seeing you as someone who was paying attention." She nodded. "Audrey." His voice shifted just slightly, the way voices shift when a person decides to say something they have been holding back. "I want you to know something. When Dean called me about you when I agreed to take that meeting, I thought I was doing him a favor. I thought I would bring you in at a support level, give you a platform to rebuild, and in 2 or 3 years, you would be a solid, mid-level contributor. That was what I was prepared for." She waited. "I was wrong about that," he said, "by a significant margin, and I am not often wrong about people." "You weren't wrong about the timeline," she said. "You said 2 to 3 years to indispensable. I'm trying to compress that." "You've already compressed it," he said. "That's what I'm telling you." She looked at him. In 8 months, she had learned to read Nathaniel Cross with some accuracy, learned which silences were thinking silences and which were decision silences, learned when the flatness in his voice was professional distance and when it was simply the way he spoke, when he meant something completely. This was the latter. "Thank you," she said, "for the introduction, for the platform, for the Gulf Stream, which you were right about." "I'm usually right about entrances," he said. And there it was. The almost smile, the one she had come to understand, was the full version of what other people expressed with actual laughter. She slept 4 hours on Wednesday night. Not because she was anxious, the anxiety had burned itself out weeks ago, replaced by something steadier, but because her mind was running the Thursday scenario on a continuous loop, checking for gaps, checking for anything she had missed, anything that could be used against them. She found nothing, but she checked anyway because that was who she was, and she had stopped apologizing for it. Thursday arrived. She was at the courthouse at 8:30. White suit again, the same one because she had decided. Rachel was already there, front row, as promised. Elaine was present as an expert witness, calm and precise, and prepared to answer anything. Sasha had a revised exhibit list that incorporated the SEC filing confirmation. Gavin arrived at 8:52 with Clifford Brann and 4 attorneys. He'd added 2 overnight, which told her everything she needed to know about his internal assessment of the situation. He looked different from Monday, not broken. Gavin Sterling was not the kind of man who broke visibly. It wasn't in his construction, but compressed, as if the space he normally occupied in a room had been reduced by some pressure from outside. He was wearing his intimidation suit again, and she recognized the choice as the tell it was. He was performing confidence because the real version had taken significant damage. He did not look at her when he sat down. That was new. Judge Croft entered at 9 exactly, and the room came to order. "We're reconvened in Sterling versus Hale," she said. "Mr. Brann, your client has had 48 hours to review the submitted evidence. How does the petitioner respond?" Brann stood. He was good at his job, she had to give him that. He had assembled a coherent counter-argument in 48 hours, which was genuinely impressive, given the volume of documentation he was working against. He presented the client agreement documents. He argued that the Luxembourg entities were legitimate investment vehicles. He introduced an affidavit from a tax attorney in Geneva who described the structure as standard international tax planning. He was measured, he was professional, and he was building a wall out of material that Elaine had already identified as compromised. He spoke for 18 minutes. When he sat down, Judge Croft looked at Sasha. "Ms. Ivanova?" Sasha rose. She addressed the client agreement documents first. She introduced the Forensic Document Examiner's report, 12 pages meticulously sourced that identified specific inconsistencies in 4 of the 6 agreements Brann had produced. She noted the timeline discrepancies. She noted that 2 of the client signatories, when contacted by Elaine's team, had no recollection of signing the agreements in question and had requested their own legal counsel upon seeing copies of the documents. At that point, Gavin turned to Brann and said something that was clearly not quiet enough because Judge Croft looked at him directly. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "you will communicate with your counsel on paper in this courtroom. Do I need to say that again?" He shook his head. Sasha continued. She addressed the Geneva affidavit efficiently, 3 minutes pointing out that the attorney who signed it had been retained by Sterling Industries 2 years prior and had a documented consulting relationship that rendered the affidavit at minimum a conflicted opinion. She then carefully and precisely noted that the documentation submitted to the court had also been provided to federal financial regulators and that the evidence had been designated as priority review material. She did not use the word FBI. She did not need to. Judge Croft's expression did not change, but she made a note. Audrey watched her make the note. Then Sasha did the thing that Audrey had not known was coming because Sasha had held it back, had made the strategic decision to hold it back until the right moment, which was this moment, and introduced the final exhibit. "Your Honor, the respondent submits Exhibit 32, a sworn affidavit from Mr. Howard Breck, age 74 of Tacoma, Washington, a client of Sterling Financial Advisory for 11 years, in which Mr. Breck attests that funds totaling $460,000 were transferred from his investment account without his knowledge or consent, that he discovered the transfers during a personal audit of his retirement accounts, and that he contacted regulatory authorities independently before any involvement by the respondent in this matter upon realizing the discrepancy." She paused for exactly 1 beat. "Mr. Breck is 74 years old, Your Honor. He is a retired engineer. He trusted Sterling Financial Advisory with money he spent 40 years earning. He is not the only client in this situation. He is simply the one who noticed first. The courtroom was completely silent. Gavin's face had gone through several distinct phases during Sasha's presentation. The controlled neutrality of a man managing optics had given way by degrees to something rawer, a tightness around the jaw, a stillness in the eyes that Audrey recognized as the particular quality of panic that has not yet found a direction. He was sitting very straight and very still, and she could see, because she had known him for 14 years, that his hands under the table were not still at all. Judge Croft set down her pen. "Mr. Bran," she said, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Is your client in a position to provide this court with a complete, verified, independently auditable accounting of all client funds managed by Sterling Financial Advisory over the past 7 years?" Bran glanced at Gavin. A flicker, barely anything, the smallest consultation. But the judge saw it. Audrey saw it. Everyone saw it. "Your Honor," Bran said carefully, "we would need additional time to compile—" "That is not a yes," Judge Croft said. "No, Your Honor, it is not." She nodded. Once. The nod of a person who has heard what they needed to hear. "The court is voiding the settlement agreement in Sterling versus Hale on the grounds of material misrepresentation in the petitioner's asset disclosures," she said. "A full forensic review of the petitioner's financial interests, including all entities through which those interests are held, is ordered. All assets remain frozen pending the outcome of that review." She looked at Gavin directly. "Mr. Sterling, I want to be plain with you. What has been presented to this court today is serious. I am referring this matter to the appropriate authorities for further review. If you have not yet consulted criminal defense counsel, I would strongly recommend doing so." She picked up her gavel. In the fraction of a second before it came down, Audrey heard Gavin say, not to Bran, not to anyone in particular, just aloud, in a voice she had never heard from him before, a voice stripped of all the performance and architecture and social machinery, "This can't be happening." The gavel came down. She did not look at him after that. She turned to Sasha, who was already making notes. She turned to Patricia, who had tears in her eyes that she was firmly suppressing because Patricia Wells did not cry in courtrooms and was angry at herself for coming close. She looked at Rachel in the front row, who was sitting perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap and her face composed, exactly as she had promised, except that one tear had made it down her left cheek without her apparently noticing. They walked out of the courthouse into the April morning, and Rachel grabbed her hand on the steps and held it hard, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because some things have to be felt before they can be spoken. Then Rachel said quietly, "Mom would have loved this." Audrey breathed in the cold air. "Yeah," she said, "she would have." Sasha was already on her phone. 3 calls simultaneously, it seemed, the way Sasha operated. Patricia was talking to a colleague. Marcus had sent a text that said simply, "We're watching the news feeds. What happened?" And Audrey typed back, "Everything we planned." His response came in 11 seconds, a single emoji of a crown, which was so unlike Marcus's usual professional register that it made her laugh out loud on the courthouse steps, which made Rachel look at her, which made Rachel laugh too, and for a moment, just a moment, they were 2 sisters standing in the sun, and it was enough. Nathaniel called at 10:43. "Sasha briefed me," he said. "Good. The settlement is void. Yes. The assets are frozen. Yes. He's been referred to authorities. Yes." A pause. "And how are you?" She thought about the question, really thought about it the way she had been too busy to think about anything for 8 months. "I'm standing on courthouse steps in Seattle in a white suit," she said, "and I feel like myself. I feel completely, entirely like myself." He was quiet for a moment. "London restructuring begins next week," he said. "The Meridian team needs direction on the Manchester tenant negotiation, and I want to talk about the 2 new pipeline targets before the end of the month." "I'll be in the office tomorrow morning," she said. 7, she said. She put the phone in her pocket and looked at Rachel. "I have to go back to work," she said. "Of course you do," Rachel said, and hugged her, really hugged her, the kind that meant everything that couldn't be said. "Go build something." She drove back to Cross Industries in the Honda. Not the Gulfstream, not a car service. The Honda because it had gotten her through 8 months of the hardest and best work of her life, and she was not done with it yet. She parked in the lot, walked through the lobby, took the elevator to her floor, and sat at her desk. Marcus had left a Vestry Holdings update in her inbox. The Manchester lease renewal was in final stages. The 2 pipeline targets were waiting. She opened her laptop. Outside, in whatever office he was retreating to, Gavin Sterling was beginning to understand the full weight of what had arrived. His attorneys were calling. His clients were calling. The structures he had built piece by careful piece, over years of believing that his wife was not paying attention, were coming apart in the hands of a forensic accountant, a federal regulator, and the woman he had once pushed papers toward like a dismissed napkin. He had smirked at her across that table. He had grabbed her wrist. He had laughed. And she had built all of this out of that moment. She pulled up the Manchester file and got to work. The Manchester lease closed on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the courthouse steps, and Marcus sent a message to the team group chat at 11:47 p.m. London time that was entirely in capital letters, which was the most emotionally expressive thing Audrey had ever seen him do. She was in Seattle when it came through, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, reviewing the Meridian restructuring calendar. And she read his message and allowed herself exactly the kind of smile that she had been rationing carefully for the past 8 months, wide and real and private, the kind no one else needed to see. The Manchester tenant had signed. The lease locked in cash flows that transformed Meridian Property Holdings from a middling asset carrying outdated book values into something that several analysts, once the deal became public, would describe as a generational acquisition. The numbers that Marcus had pulled in that 12-hour session back in London, the ones that had left him pale with exhaustion, had turned out to be conservative. Audrey had known they were conservative. She had not said so at the time because she had learned in 8 months of working alongside Nathaniel Cross that there was a specific kind of confidence that was most powerful when it was quiet. She texted Marcus back, "Well done, sleep now." Then she closed the Meridian calendar and opened a new document and started writing the framework for what came next. What came next had been taking shape in her mind for several weeks, building itself from the edges inward, the way complex things do not, all at once, but accumulating. The 3 pipeline targets she had brought to Nathaniel, the restructuring model she had developed from watching how Elaine Marsh traced money, which had given her an insight into corporate financial structure that she was fairly certain most deal originators did not have, because most deal originators had not spent months learning how fraud worked from the inside. The London deal. The pattern she had been reverse engineering from Nathaniel's acquisition history for 8 months. She had something to propose. She had been preparing to propose it. She was waiting for the right moment, which she had learned from Nathaniel himself was a real thing that was worth waiting for. The right moment arrived on a Friday morning in May, 5 weeks after the hearing. She walked into his office at 7:15 before anyone else was in the building and closed the door. He was already at his desk, which she had expected. He looked up, registered that she had closed the door, and put down what he was reading. "Tell me," he said. She sat across from him and set a 30-page document on the desk between them. It was bound simply her name on the cover, a title that read, "Cross-Industry Strategic Expansion Framework, a Proposal." He picked it up. He did not open it yet. He looked at her. "How long have you been working on this?" he said. "Since February," she said. "Seriously, the outline has been in my head since November." "November," he repeated. "You had been here 4 months." 3.5, she said. He opened the document. She had structured it in 4 sections. The first was an analysis of Cross Industries' current acquisition model, its strengths, its blind spots, and the specific categories of deal that its existing approach was systematically missing because of a geographic and sector concentration that had served the firm well in its first 15 years and would begin to constrain it in the next 5. The second was a framework for a new vertical, a dedicated financial services turnaround practice, separate from the main private equity operation that would target advisory firms and asset managers with structural problems, the category of company that Elaine's forensic work had taught Audrey to read, with a depth she was fairly certain was unique. The third was a pipeline 7 specific targets with preliminary valuation analysis that fit the new vertical's criteria. The fourth was a staffing and compensation proposal for herself. He read for 22 minutes. She sat across from him and did not fidget, did not check her phone, did not perform patience. She had actual patience. She had built it over 8 months of waiting for things she had put in motion to arrive at their destinations. When he finished, he set the document down and was quiet for a moment. "The financial services vertical," he said. "Yes, you're arguing that the fraud detection skills your team developed on the Sterling matter translate directly into deal origination in the advisory space." "I'm arguing that they do more than translate," she said. "I'm arguing that the ability to read a financial services firm's actual internal structure, not its disclosed structure, its actual structure, is the single most valuable skill in identifying turnaround targets in that sector, because the firms with the most upside potential are almost always the ones where the gap between what the books show and what the underlying assets are worth is largest. And that gap exists in most cases because of some version of the same kind of obfuscation that I spent 9 months learning to decode." "I.e. adtcc." He looked at her. "You're proposing to build a practice out of what Gavin taught you," he said. She had thought about how to answer that question because she had known he would ask it in some form. "I'm proposing to build a practice out of what I taught myself," she said, "using every resource available to me, including the ones I didn't choose." A silence. "The 7 pipeline targets," he said. "You've done preliminary valuation analysis on all of them." "Pages 18 through 29, she said. "I've seen 3 of these names in the last year," he said. "Passed on 2 of them. Didn't have a framework for the 3rd. "I know," she said. "I pulled your deal history." "Of course you did." He picked up the document again and turned to the staffing section, the last section, her proposal for her own role. He read it. He said nothing. She had proposed a partnership track, not a salary increase, not a title change, a formal partnership track with a defined 18-month timeline, milestone-based with specific deal origination targets, and a carried interest structure on any deals she originated. It was aggressive. She knew it was aggressive. She had written it at 2 a.m. in February and then left it alone for 3 weeks and come back to it and decided it was right. "This is what you've been building toward," he said. It was not a question. "Since November," she said. "Yes. You walked in here 9 months ago with a Honda and $4,000 and a legal strategy, and you've been running a parallel track this entire time." "I've been doing the work," she said. "All of it. Every deal memo, every due diligence file, every London negotiation session. All of it was real, and all of it was the job. And I've also been building this. They're not separate things. The work is the proposal." He looked at her for a long moment. The particular long moment that she had learned to read as Nathaniel Cross, making a decision that he had actually already made and was now formalizing in his own mind before he said it aloud. "I want 2 weeks to review the pipeline targets in detail," he said, "and I want Sasha's input on the legal structure of the new vertical before we formalize anything." She felt something move through her, not relief, not triumph, something quieter and more durable than either. 2 weeks, she said. "And Audrey." He said her name the way he had only begun to say it in the past few months directly, without the professional distance of hail. "This is good work. This is some of the best strategic thinking I have seen proposed to me in 20 years of doing this." She nodded. "I know," she said. He blinked, and then he did something she had seen him do exactly twice in 9 months. He laughed. A real laugh, short and genuine and surprised out of him. "Get out of my office," he said. "I have work to do." She got up, picked up her bag, and walked to the door. "Nathaniel," she said with her hand on the doorframe. He looked up. "Thank you for taking the meeting in October," she said. "The first one." "Dean told me not to waste your time," he said. "I thought he was being sentimental. He wasn't." She nodded and walked out. The news about Gavin broke publicly on a Thursday morning in mid-May, 6 weeks after the hearing. She saw it first on a financial industry news feed, a brief initial item, the kind that appears when a regulatory action has been confirmed, but the full details are still being assembled. Sterling Financial Advisory under SEC investigation, following allegations of client fund misappropriation. Founder Gavin Sterling unavailable for comment. The firm's offices in Seattle confirmed to be under review. She read it once, Then she put her phone face down on her desk and went back to the pipeline analysis she was preparing for Nathaniel's 2-week review. Dean called at 9:15. "You've seen it," he said. "I've seen it. Are you all right?" She thought about the question the way she had thought about Rachel's version of it on the courthouse steps, really considered it for a moment with honesty. "I'm completely all right," she said. "Dean, I have been all right since October. I've just also been very busy." He made a sound that was half laugh, half something more serious. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said. "What?" "That conversation we had when you were 26. You were 2 years into Merrill, you just had your first major client win, and I told you that the most important thing I could tell you was to never let anyone convince you that your instincts were wrong. That the moment you started deferring your own judgment to someone else's opinion of your limitations, you would lose something that was very hard to get back." She remembered the conversation, vaguely with the soft focus of something from many years ago. "I lost it for a while," she said. "You got it back," he said. "I did," she said. "Faster than most people would have," he said. "And what you built in 9 months, Audrey, I've been in this business for 35 years. What you built in 9 months is not normal. It's not what most people are capable of." "I had something to build toward," she said. "That helps." "It helps," he agreed. "But it has to be in you first." She sat with that for a moment. "How are things at Sterling Industries?" she asked. Not because she needed to know, but because she was human, and some questions are asked not for the answer but for the acknowledgement that the question exists. "The firm is likely finished," Dean said matter-of-factly. "The SEC investigation alone would make client retention nearly impossible. If federal charges follow, and from what you've told me they will, then it's over. The assets that aren't frozen are already walking out the door." She said nothing. "Does that feel the way you expected it to feel?" Dean asked. She thought about Gavin's voice on the phone 3 weeks before the hearing, the practiced warmth, the calculation under the casualness. She thought about the conference room on the 41st floor and the papers pushed across the marble and the hand on her wrist and the laugh. She thought about the fact that she had built something real while he was busy celebrating. "It feels like the right outcome," she said. "That's all, just the right outcome." The FBI made its formal move in the 3rd week of May. Agent Reyes called Audrey again, a brief professional call to inform her that a formal investigation had been opened, that the evidence submitted by her team had been incorporated into a broader inquiry involving entities that she would read about in due course, and that her cooperation had been formally noted in the case file. She thanked Agent Reyes and hung up and called Sasha. "It's official," she said. "I know," Sasha said. "I got the same notification 20 minutes ago. Audrey, the broader inquiry she's referencing. It's significant. I can't say more than that right now, but what your documentation connected it was much bigger than Gavin. He was a node, not the center." "A node," Audrey said. "You pulled the right thread," Sasha said. "You couldn't have known where it led." She sat at her desk and thought about that for a moment. The Luxembourg entity, the account statements in the filing cabinet, the night she had found them, and understood slowly what she was looking at. She had not known when she started assembling the folder that she was looking at anything beyond her husband's specific crimes. She had not known that Elaine Marsh would find connections that federal investigators had been approaching from a different direction for 2 years. She had only known what was in front of her. She had organized it, protected it, waited for the right moment, and delivered it with precision. The rest had taken care of itself. That was, she thought, something she was going to have to sit with for a while. The scale of it. The fact that what she had done in her home office in Seattle during a marriage she was quietly exiting had reached further than she had planned or intended or imagined. She filed that thought away for later. There was a pipeline review in 45 minutes. The 2 weeks Nathaniel had requested passed with the particular speed of weeks that are full of real work and genuine stakes. She prepared supporting analysis for each of the 7 pipeline targets. She met with Sasha twice about the legal structure of the proposed new vertical. She brought Marcus into the conversation, not about the partnership proposal, which was her business, but about the operational framework for the new practice. Because Marcus had grown significantly in the months they had worked together, and she had decided quietly that if the vertical was approved, she wanted him on it. She did not tell him this yet. She had learned from the best teacher available that timing was everything. On a Wednesday morning in the last week of May, Nathaniel called her into his office. Sasha was already there, which Audrey had not expected. She sat down. "I've reviewed the proposal," he said. "Sasha has reviewed the legal structure, and I've had preliminary conversations with 2 of the pipeline targets, informal, no commitments to test the market reception." She waited. "The financial services vertical is approved," he said. "Effective immediately. You're building it from the ground up, your parameters, your pipeline, your team. The partnership track is approved at the terms you proposed with one modification." "What modification?" "The timeline," he said. 18 months is too long." She looked at him. "You want to compress it." 12 months, he said. "The milestones stay the same. The timeline compresses. If you hit the milestones, and I believe you will hit the milestones, partnership is formalized at 12 months. She held very still for a moment. "Why compress it?" she said. "What changed?" "2 things, he said. The FBI development. When what you built from a folder in a filing cabinet connects to a 2-year federal investigation that professional investigators couldn't close from their end, that tells me something about how you see things that I cannot afford to treat as entry-level capability." He paused. "And the pipeline analysis you submitted last week. The 3rd target. Westbridge Advisory. How did you find it?" "Regulatory filing discrepancy," she said. "Their Form ADV shows a client concentration that doesn't match the AUM distribution they reported to their insurance carrier. It's a 3-line inconsistency buried in 2 separate public documents. The gap represents approximately $40 million in assets that are either misreported or mismanaged. Either way, there's a story there." "No one else saw that," he said. "No one else was looking for it," she said. "I look for it because I know what it looks like from the inside." He nodded once. 12 months, he said. "Start building." Sasha was looking at her with the expression of a woman who was very good at not showing emotion and was currently losing that battle by a small margin. "Thank you," Audrey said, to both of them. She walked out of Nathaniel's office and went directly to Marcus's desk. "I need 5 minutes," she said. He swiveled in his chair. "Everything okay?" "Everything is better than okay," she said. "Come into the conference room." She told him about the new vertical. She told him she wanted him on it as her first hire with a title that reflected what he had actually become over the past 9 months, rather than what he had been when he arrived. She watched his face go through the sequence, the initial careful neutrality of someone who has learned not to react until they understand what they are actually being offered, and then the real reaction breaking through the one he couldn't contain. "You're serious," he said. "I am never anything else," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I want to be on this, whatever it takes." "I know you do," she said. "That's why I asked." She called Rachel that evening from the studio apartment, sitting at the kitchen table, where 8 months ago she had opened a spreadsheet titled Position, and understood that her real life was ahead of her. "It's done," she said when Rachel picked up. "All of it. All of it. The vertical is approved, the partnership track is 12 months, the FBI investigation is open, Gavin's firm is finished." She paused. "All of it." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Not the careful quiet of someone searching for words. The full quiet of someone feeling something large enough to require a moment of simple acknowledgement. "You know what I want to know," Rachel said finally. "What?" "That night, the night after you signed the papers, the Marriott parking lot, what were you actually thinking? Not the spreadsheet, not the plan. What were you actually feeling?" Audrey thought about it. The parking lot, the Honda, the dark, the moment before she opened the laptop. "I was terrified," she said, "completely terrified. And I was also, I don't know how to say this exactly, I was also the most awake I had been in 12 years. Like the fear and the clarity were the same feeling, and I thought if I can just stay in motion, if I can just not stop, then whatever comes next has to be better than what I'm leaving." "That's it," Rachel said softly. "That's the whole story, isn't it?" "That's the whole story," Audrey said. The Meridian restructuring continued through June. The first Westbridge advisory conversations happened in late May and confirmed what Audrey had suspected. The gap in the regulatory filing was exactly what it appeared to be, and the firm's majority stakeholder, once approached through the right introduction, was quietly desperate for an exit. The new vertical's first potential deal was taking shape before it had been formally announced. On a morning in early June, Nathaniel stopped at her office doorway, his standard mode of appearing, the one that meant something deliberate was coming, and said, "The London Meridian Board wants to meet the person who found the Manchester tenant angle. They're going to be in Seattle next week." "I'll be there," she said. "I told them you'd lead the meeting," he said. "Not support it. Lead it." She nodded. "One more thing," he said. He reached into his jacket and set a small envelope on the edge of her desk. From Elaine. She picked it up after he walked away. Inside was a handwritten note from Elaine Marsh, precise handwriting, no wasted words. Very. Elaine that said, "Howard Breck called my office yesterday. He asked me to pass along that he wanted to say thank you to whoever made sure his money was found. I told him someone very determined had been paying attention. He said, 'Tell her I hope she's okay.' I told him she's more than okay. I thought you should know." She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her desk drawer in the same place where she had once kept the anniversary photograph face down, and the trade felt accurate and right. Howard Breck, 74 years old, retired engineer from Tacoma, 40 years of savings. He had noticed first. He had gone to the SEC on his own with less documentation and less certainty because something had not been right and he had refused to let it go. She felt something for him that she did not have a clean word for a kinship maybe. The particular solidarity of people who noticed when something was wrong and did not talk themselves out of it. She thought she might write him a letter. Not about the case, just a letter. She added it to her list. In the months that followed, the story of what had happened in that Seattle courtroom traveled in the way that true things travel not in a straight line, not all at once, but gradually through the networks where people paid attention to such things. The financial industry, which was small in the ways that mattered, noted the emergence of a new vertical at Cross Industries led by someone whose name had not been attached to anything public 12 months prior. The analysts who covered the sector noted the Meridian deal with the kind of attention that deals received when they were structured unusually well. The Westbridge Advisory transaction, when it closed in the fall, was described in one industry publication as a textbook example of the kind of overlooked value that sophisticated turnaround operators find where others see nothing. Nobody wrote about the Honda, nobody wrote about the Marriott parking lot, or the $4,000, or the folder she had assembled in secret while filing her husband's documents like a wife who was not paying attention. She did not need them to. She knew the story. She was living in the part that came after it. On the last Thursday of June, 1 year and 3 months after she had walked out of the Sterling house with a bag and a car, and the clearest understanding she had ever had of her own capacity. Audrey Hale sat across a boardroom table from the Meridian Property Holdings Board, introduced herself as a partner at Cross Industries, and led 2 hours of restructuring discussion with the precision and authority of someone who had never doubted she belonged in the room. Nathaniel sat at the far end of the table. He did not speak unless directly addressed. He was there as the principal. She was there as the lead. At the end of the meeting, the board chair, a British man named Gerald Whitmore, who had the careful formality of someone who rarely gave direct compliments, looked at her and said, "Miss Hale, I have to say, the Manchester analysis was one of the most precise pieces of deal identification I've seen in 30 years. Where did you develop that particular eye?" She looked at him across the table. "I had a very good teacher," she said, "several of them, and I spent a long time paying very close attention to things that other people had decided weren't worth watching." Gerald Whitmore nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "we're glad you were watching." She drove back to Cross Industries in the Honda afterward, the city moving past the windows in the particular golden way of a late June afternoon in Seattle. And she thought about the woman who had signed those papers 14 months ago in a room designed to make her feel small. She thought about Gavin's hand on her wrist, the laugh, the two-fingered push of the papers across the table. She thought about what she had built from that moment, brick by brick in the dark while no one was watching. Nathaniel had asked her once in the early months what she had felt in the Marriott parking lot the night after the signing. She hadn't answered him then. She answered him now in her own mind, driving through the June light in a car that had carried her through the hardest and best year of her life. She had felt afraid, and she had felt alive. And she had understood in the particular way that people understand things, when everything else has been stripped away, that those two feelings together were not a sign that something was wrong. They were a signal that something real was beginning. Audrey Hale had started with nothing, and she had built everything, on her own terms, in her own time, with her own hands, and she was just getting started.